Good morning. My name is Greg Penner. I'm a worship associate here. Last Sunday, Ellen Steins came up and made an announcement. Ellen volunteers for Helping Our People Eat, or HOPE, the food pantry we support. She asked HOPE helps people who struggle with the basic human need of feeding themselves. It's only logical that buying essentials like toilet paper is also a challenge. And I was happy to see that today in the back of the sanctuary, where the HOPE bucket is, there's a lot of toilet paper there. I have a feeling more will be needed over time, so keep it coming, I think. I appreciate Ellen sharing that, because I had not thought about that. And I appreciate all the good work she and our other volunteers do. And I'm grateful that I don't have to worry about being able to afford toilet paper or having a safe, clean, and convenient place to use it. When I was looking for an apartment after my divorce, I saw places that did not have in-unit washers and dryers. After 35 years of home ownership, that was my base level of comfort and convenience. I was fortunate to find a place that had a washer-dryer and a dishwasher and was safe and comfortable and affordable. It also had a pool and a hot tub and was owned by someone in my extended family. In that same post-divorce time, I was in deep financial trouble. I was enormously in debt. Work was slow, but it was happening, so while I couldn't dig myself out of the hole that I was in, I wasn't sinking any further. I was stressed and afraid and felt really vulnerable. Then on St. Patrick's Day 2020, the job I was on in LA shut down. I drove deserted freeways to an empty LAX and came home to face a complete industry shutdown. The life that was reasonably affordable a month before was now teetering on the edge. My sister worked at New Seasons and told me that they were hiring. I applied, and 2 weeks after the COVID shutdown began, I was training as a cashier on a 3-month contract. One story I tell of that time is that working at New Seasons was the best thing I could have done. I had 40 hours a week of learning and socializing. I was out of my apartment, and in a small way, I was contributing to help making those early terrible days of the pandemic a little more tolerable. And I was earning $15.25 an hour. That kept my financial panic at bay, but just barely. At that hourly rate, after taxes, 40 hours a week would cover my rent and my medical, dental, and car insurance. That was it. There was no extra money for food or gas or a phone bill, let alone supporting children or paying down my mountain of debt. A fender bender, a broken tooth, a bout of COVID could have pushed me into financial freefall. I felt like the beam I was balancing on just got a lot narrower. I was one bad gust of wind away from tumbling off it. I considered my coworkers at the store. Most of them lived on about the same amount of money I was struggling with. In my comfortable life, I was disconnected from what it took to make it on even a slightly above minimum wage paycheck. Now that I was having to adjust to that myself, I felt precarious. And I became even more aware of the privilege that I carry. When the pandemic hit, my landlord, my sister's husband's brother, let me skip my April rent payment. How many of my grocery store colleagues were given that offer? How many of their landlords could be okay without a month's rent? If I had to, I had family I could move in with. It would be uncomfortable, but I would be welcome and safe. I borrowed money from my mom. That was very uncomfortable, but I was able to do it, and she was able to loan it to me. And I had the privileged belief that ultimately I was going to be okay, that even if I was blown off my feet, I would bounce back. But what if I didn't have that privilege? What if my car died? Or I broke a tooth and my insurance had lapsed and I couldn't afford to get it fixed? I was nearly 60 then. How long was my health going to last? Without my support system, my privilege, my luck, how far would I fall? How fast would I fall? That was not an abstract thought. That was a fear I carried around with me every day. Fortunately, I did not fall. It wasn't long before the video production industry masked up and got back to work. I left that temp job 2 weeks before the end of my contract because I had other work coming in. As companies embraced video as an alternative to meeting in person, I experienced a little pandemic bump. I was okay. I am okay. But I have not lost the awareness of my vulnerability, of the privilege I carry, and of the narrowness of the path that I'm on.
Our reading today is from the New York Times article called "A Life Without a Home," and these are the words of individuals who are homeless. Fiona Ruscher, who is 43, lives in her car with her partner Sage and their teenage son. And she says, once everything is taken from you, it becomes, how much more do you have to give up? We've had shelters that have said, we can take you, but we don't allow dogs. We've already given up everything. You're not going to take away our best friends. These are our dogs. They're our emotional support animals. These are our protectors. They're like kids. You can't do that. But they expect you to do that. They expect you to give these things up. They expect you to be happy with a doghouse because you're in your car. No, we want housing. What's good for you should be good for me. If it's not good enough for you, then why are you trying to pawn it off on me? Max, who is 47, has been staying in motel rooms with his wife and their sons for several months. He writes, our rent went up unexpectedly. We had a year-long lease, but then the landlord made it month to month. We couldn't suck it up and pay. The rent was $1,400, and the next month went up to $1,900. And Lisbeth Santiago, who is 28 and sleeps with her 2 children on the floor of her sister's living room in Fort Worth. She says, living with my sister feels terrible. It's very tense. My children are very loud and rambunctious while her son is quiet. My sister, having anxiety and paranoia and autism, it's upsetting for her, so I feel quite bad. And she worries about the effects it has on her kids. Elizabeth said, I know it affects my daughter. She tries to hide it. But she's a child. I want her to be a child. I don't want her to worry about why mommy's upset. These are adult concerns. Those are things she shouldn't have to have on her mind. I wish she didn't have to experience any of that. I want to tell you a story about a woman that I will call Holly. That's not her real name. Holly is homeless and spends hours every day asking for money at the highway exit near my home in Portland. I give her $5 a few times a week. I've never seen her altered, and we always exchange a few kind words. My daughter Mika, who is 25 and doesn't drive, often walks past Holly on her way to and from public transportation. They usually say hello, and one day Mika took her to the food carts and bought her lunch and got to hear her story. When we think of homeless people, we sometimes think of folks who are struggling with mental illness or addiction to drugs and alcohol. And it's certainly true that a fair number of homeless folks who sleep outside struggle with one or both of those issues. But it's also really, really clear that homelessness is a much larger issue than that. Holly has a bachelor's degree. She had a successful career and is the mother of 2 school-aged children. But she got a brain tumor, and in the aftermath of that was diagnosed with a seizure disorder, which meant she lost her job and she had a great deal of medical bills. She was in the process of getting divorced because her husband was cheating, and so she lost her housing. And for the last few years, Holly has camped with her boyfriend and another friend somewhere in my neighborhood. She almost moved in with a cousin who then died suddenly. She and her boyfriend lost almost everything when someone set their tent on fire while they were inside of it. She misses her kids, who live with their dad in another state, but she is grateful that they are safe and cared for because she doesn't have the resources to do that right now. Holly isn't homeless because she's a bad person. She's not homeless because she struggles with mental illness or because she's addicted to drugs or alcohol. She is unhoused because housing is expensive and because she had medical debt and lost her safety net. She is always so kind. She told my daughter that she can't control what happens to her and she can't control what other people do, but she can control how she interacts with people, and so she tries to be kind. As the minister of this congregation, I see a lot of folks who come in requesting assistance from the minister's discretionary fund. I have heard some heartbreaking stories. Folks working 2 jobs to take care of their families, 1 regular job and 1 gig job delivering food for DoorDash or driving Ubers. And it's really not uncommon to see someone who got injured on 1 job or couldn't work the other job, or someone who got sick and couldn't work for a week or so. And with gig work, if you don't work, you don't get paid. I also see folks who couldn't pay their car insurance for a month, and then to reinstate it, have to go to a company that charges 3 times as much. Keeping someone in their home or up to date on their bills is so much less expensive than getting them back in to shelter. One of my first real lessons about homelessness was when we moved from Providence back to Portland in early 2002. We had a foster daughter named Jess who lived with us for a year, and I have her permission to tell her story to you. We had a nice conversation on Facebook Messenger yesterday. When we moved back, we elected to have her stay in Rhode Island with a new family because she had a lot of support systems there. Unfortunately, the new family didn't work out, and she wound up in another group home. She graduated from high school, turned 18, and ran away, thereby removing herself from the foster care system all within a week. And Jess became homeless. And here is where my perspective was changed, because I used to think that homelessness meant you slept outside. That's sort of the stereotype we have in our heads. But that wasn't her reality. For at least 7 or 8 years, she had incredibly unstable housing. She never rented her own place. She never had her name on a lease. But I don't think she ever slept outside. Our stereotypes about unhoused folks mostly involve the people who we sort of see as obviously unhoused, ones who sleep in tents or in doorways or broken down RVs on the side of the road. The New York Times did a really comprehensive article about this recently that I totally commend to you, called "A Life Without a Home." It begins, Lori Teresa Yearwood, a journalist who lived through years of homelessness, spoke of the ways we discount those without shelter. She said, "Society creates a new species of people, and we carefully crafted an image of them, one of broken passivity and victimhood. People in need of constant scrutiny and monitoring," she said in a 2022 speech. When we shift and widen the perspective of the unhoused, that's when things radically change. The Times sent reporters and photographers to interview people experiencing homelessness and gather their perspectives in their own words. And the biggest takeaway is that so many of the folks who are actually unhoused don't sleep on the streets. And on one hand, that's a really good thing, and on another hand, it means that we don't actually see the depth of the problem. Many, many folks, especially families with kids, sleep doubled up with friends or family members, or stay in cheap motels, or live in their cars. This was Jess's experience as well. She found a boyfriend, but he was on SSI, and so she couldn't live in his subsidized apartment. She got pregnant and stayed with a woman living on her couch in the living room, but that was stressful for both of them. And when Jess was about 8 months pregnant, she ran into her sisters who had been adopted by an aunt when they were about 3 or 4, and she got folded back into her biological family, who she hadn't seen in about 12 years. She stayed with them a while, and her mother, who had lost custody of them when Jess was 6, ended up getting legal custody of Jess's son. Most of us are better parents at 32 than we were at 16. Jess and I have kept in occasional touch since I moved away, and she still calls me Mom. She battled homelessness, and she had another daughter who went into foster care on the day she was born because Jess and her boyfriend were staying with friends who had lost their children to the state. That daughter was later adopted by her foster parents, and Jess and she are in touch and see each other occasionally. I am really thrilled and proud that Jess has managed to find relatively stable housing, and much to her surprise, when she didn't think she could get pregnant again, she had another son that she has been able to raise. She's worked cleaning stadiums after events, and now has been working at a convenience store gas station. But she has managed to raise her son, Tyrannus, who is 8 and is doing well. She is grateful to have that stability, and I'm so happy for her. The thing that I was always the most struck by was the kindness and generosity of poor people. Jess never was forced to sleep outside because people let her stay with them. She pitched in financially when she could, but there was a system of community care, of no one is going to take care of us, so we're going to take care of each other, that I was really impressed by. Linda Villarosa writes, "Crashing at someone's house, doubling up, couch surfing, it all conjures a rosy scenario in which someone takes in friends or family members who have fallen on hard times, offering them comfort, safety, and a roof over their heads. But in reality, doubling up is much more complicated, under the radar form of homelessness. It might be a temporary situation, it might be a precursor to living in a shelter or on the street, or part of a cycle of housing instability that involves crowded living conditions and a devastating lack of privacy and safety. The Department of Housing and Urban Development doesn't recognize doubling up as homelessness, which can mean that families and individuals who live with others by necessity, not choice, no one would choose to sleep with their 5 kids in one bedroom, lose out on an essential government services and benefits. And because of this, there aren't a lot of great counts of how many people are homelessness or housing insecure in this way. But the one set of stats we do have is because some important legislation that was passed in 1987 that says that students who lose their housing because of economic hardship or losing their homes must receive services from the public schools, including free lunch and free transportation, even if they are living out of the district. Kids who bounce around from school to school are almost always way behind, and so keeping kids at the same school is really beneficial. Using this method of counting, the country counted over 1.2 million homeless students in 2022, including 76% who were doubled up staying with friends or family. 1.2 million children in school. And while these families are more likely to be able to stay together, it's not easy or pleasant to be a long-term, sometimes resented guest in someone's home. Can you imagine having an extra 2 or 3 or 5 people staying in your house for months? It's not uncommon for people to stay with others for a while and then have to move to a motel or a shelter or live in their cars. And if you don't have the resources for motels or a network of folks willing to take you in for a while, you may end up sleeping outside. And it's not surprising that the people who sleep outside are the ones who are more likely to be suffering from addiction or mental health issues. It's hard enough to double up with healthy family members, but addiction or unmanaged mental illness means that folks are less likely to be employed, less likely to have a car to sleep in, or be able to afford weekly motels, even if they have an eviction or bad credit. We are dealing with that here, right now. Our leadership feels that it's important not to demonize homelessness in and of itself. Our principles and values really encourage us to emphasize the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and to focus on justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. We believe that sleeping outside isn't a crime, and we aren't willing to chase people away just because they are sleeping outside. And we are struggling sometimes with behaviors that make living our values around this challenging. Currently, there are 2 people who often sleep on our property at night, Cody and Lisa. Neither have been violent or anything, but the lack of bathroom facilities mean that our bushes get used as toilets, and that's really challenging for Bev and the other people who do our landscaping. They leave sleeping bags and trash in our recycling bins. And the preschool who we rent to doesn't like that they are there near their space. They feel unsafe, and sometimes someone uses the bathroom or changes their Depends within sight of the preschool and the kids, and that's really not okay. The board is meeting with the preschool next week to see if we can find a solution. We've always believed that we don't want to say folks can't sleep outside unless their behaviors make it unsafe. We're getting close on this one again. And we desperately wish that there were better options available. We wish that Cody and Lisa had housing options that they would take. We wish 24-hour public restrooms were available nearby, but we haven't had any luck on that front. And it is possible that we will need to not let them stay anymore, but that feels a lot like kicking the problem down the road, and the problem is a human being with needs and wants just like we have, a dry, safe place to sleep in peace. That's not a lot to ask. Clackamas County is working on the issue using money from the Metro Supportive Houses Service Tax. They've hired 24 outreach people who are helping families and single people with rent support and reducing barriers to entry to housing. And it is working. There was a 65% reduction in homelessness in the county since 2019, according to an article in the Oregonian. But there is more to be done. My Father's Heart Day Shelter just down the road needs volunteers and donations. We need to support measures that provide shelter and affordable housing to people. And perhaps most of all, we need to treat people with compassion. Some of us have been close to the edge and have survived with a combination of luck and a safety net. Let's remember how many other people are dealing with similar issues without the safety net. We can hold the line about behavior, but without safe options, we're just passing the problem along. Let's work for accessible mental health care, for addiction programs with no barriers or waiting times for entry, and an end to a world where medical debt or losing a job can mean losing your housing for years. We live in a nation where our economic system runs on the backs of the poor. We need poor people for our economic system to work the way it is, which is ridiculous. Because if there's enough housing for everyone, landlords can't keep raising rents or not renting to folks with bad credit. Between 2021 and 2022, average rental prices in the Portland metro area increased between 14 and 27%, meaning folks without enough money to buy a home were hit with enormous increases. I don't know about any of you, but most of our pay didn't go up 14 to 27%. A bill was passed capping rental increases at 10% a year or less, but that's still a far greater increase than most people's paychecks are going up. Let's advocate for a world where everyone has a home, where everyone has a warm, dry place to sleep that is safe. The world would be a better place. May it be so. Blessed be. And amen.